Hey folks, thanks for joining me for this episode of the Embellish Podcast, a podcast focused on product stories, product storytellers, interesting brand ambassadors, and any other tangent that I happen to come up with. Whether you're a bourbon fan, a geek, a casual observer, or someone just floating through this channel, I hope you find what we have to say interesting. If you got here by chance, please take a moment to hit the subscribe button. I can be found on just about any podcasting platform that exists, and if you can't find me on a platform, send me an email at embellishpod@gmail.com and I'll try to get that taken care of. I also generally live stream the recording of these episodes on Wednesday nights on YouTube around 9:30 p.m. Central Standard Time. You can find all of my links on Instagram at embellishpod or Twitter with the same handle. I have a website. It is www.embellishpod.com. That's also a place to pick up these links, episode details, and more. Today, we're going to be talking with Mike from Blue Run Spirits. Conversations like this are the main reason that I started this podcast, an opportunity to talk to people who are passionate about the spirits industry, passionate about bourbon, passionate about connection, passionate about quality. The folks over at Blue Run, Mike included, are absolutely the epitome of passion about their particular product. I just finished talking with him a few minutes ago, and I can't help but think about the next opportunity we're going to have to be able to sit down and chat again. It was super fun. I hope it's entertaining, and I hope you enjoy it. This afternoon, I have Mike Montgomery joining me from Blue Run Spirits, and so I appreciate you joining me. Thank you so much. We'll just kind of kick off with let's hear about your brand, anything you have you want to sell, push out, any new releases, and we'll kind of pivot from there.
All right. Well, John, thanks for having me. It's exciting to get a chance to talk to you like in person and not just on Instagram Messenger. Mm-hmm. We've been around for almost 2 years now, and it feels like forever. And also, it's happened really, really quickly. So we have Reflection One, which is a bourbon distillate that was distilled by the GOAT Jim Rutledge. I'm really excited about that. That will be depending on when this airs. It will likely have hit shelves by then in 15 U.S. markets and Canada. And it's particularly meaningful to me. The idea of taking a step back and reflecting on something is something I think we all did a lot of, or have been doing a lot of over the last few years. For me in particular, it centered around a family health crisis in 2020. And this particular bourbon at this particular proof is what I was drinking. And it was, I think, John, you feel this, like certain times you drink a bourbon or a rye and it transports you somewhere. It puts you in a frame of mind. It changes your mood. You ever feel that?
I think that's the entire reason why I drink whiskey specifically. And, I've talked about this, the benefit that I got from the pandemic is I had the opportunity to lead some tastings with some friends that are geographically isolated. I work with digital teams across the United States and even globally. So we were able to send stuff out. And that's like, if I want a nice cocktail just to enjoy while I'm talking to people, that's okay. But whiskey, when you get into the really kind of the nuance of it, you start tasting things. It's about memory recollection. And I'm not very good at pulling out tasting notes. I'm not the guy that's like, oh, this is going to taste like cinnamon or nutmeg or whatever. But I feel relatively good about this. Reminds me of a moment in my life. And that's what makes most brown spirits, and very specifically whiskey, important and impactful to me. There's a richness of tradition, all of those things. And so there's a way to connect. If I drink Jim Beam White Label, I'm going to be transported back to college.
Me
Absolutely.
Too. Me too.
And on the good days when waiting tables went really well, maybe it's Maker's Mark, because that was the premier brand in the day.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yes, there's an attachment to whiskey and more specifically bourbon that is sentimental.
Yes, absolutely. And I've found with reflection, um, it isn't just kind of hearkening back to the past. There's also kind of this pathway forward that it provides. There's some clarity of thought, which is kind of funny when you think about like, oh, I just drank bourbon and now I have my thoughts are super clear, right? But there were some crazy things happening, and I was kind of looking for something that would either raise my spirits or distract me from kind of the realities or slash horrors that were that
Mhm.
were happening at the time. And so reflection one is obviously, it's reflection numeral one. It's got the numeral one for a reason. um, there will be further iterations of it that will be uh, different from each other, but still kind of grounded in that same kind of in the same kind of product category. Um, so that's coming out. That's it's delicious type of thing that I would like to have 50 cases of in my garage as a
Mhm.
go-to. One of the things with Blue Run has been that we're attempting to vary our price points. Also, this one will be more affordable, more approachable. That said, and I know your listeners are astute enough to know this, but we don't set retail pricing. Um, I wish we did, because I probably have to deal with far less conversations that center around, well, like, why was this $90 bottle priced at 175? It's like,
Mhm.
I can't tell you that. But as far as a suggested retail price, it's going to be much more approachable. I think it's the type of bourbon that that kind of aficionados like yourself will enjoy. I also think that people who are just interested in kind of getting into bourbon, who may drink other brown spirits, might look at and say, that's something I want to try, based upon the flavor profile, based upon the approachability, based upon maybe even the look and feel. And so that's coming, and we're really excited about that. It's for you, John, it's been on shelves in Kentucky for a handful of weeks. The rest of the country is about to see it.
Yep. So part of the reason why I began this journey of wanting to have a podcast was the opportunity to talk to brands and their unique approaches. And you have the legacy brands that have a rich history, right? They have this story that they can tell of a lineage that goes back to before Kentucky was a state of Kentucky. It was just another part of Virginia. But then you have you guys specifically, and other new brands that are entering the market, that your story becomes your brand specifically and how you kind of go to market. And I really enjoy this connection to the naming of it, and the opportunity, you're calling reflection because it has a distinct impact on your life. And a host of other people are doing something similar. I don't want to say the exact same. Everybody's got their own spin on it, but the purpose of, in my opinion, the purpose of brown spirits like this is to hurry up and slow down.
Yeah.
And so you were talking about, you're drinking something to put you in a mindset to be more contemplative and reflection based. This makes sense. Like this is what it is for most of us, whether we're aficionados or just simple consumers of it. You touched on the affordability of it, and that's a thing that we get hung up on. I took some time to do a little bit of research over, the rate of inflation of everything else in the United States versus the inflation of whiskey and whiskey related things, and it did not match national inflation. So there are prices that are higher than that are whiskey prices 5 years ago were lower than they should have been based off of what inflationary tendencies should have been. And so we're seeing that now. I think less people are concerned. I appreciate the approach of let's kind of have varied offerings at different price points, because that does allow folks that enter into the marketplace to have an opportunity to taste something that is different, but I also appreciate the understanding your value when you come to market with a thing, right? You've gone through a pretty significant process. And one of the things that I try to do a little bit of research, but one of the things that I found early on, like, you guys, butterfly is a big thing for you. But those metal butterflies that go onto the bottles, I read somewhere that it takes somewhere between 3 and 5 days to finish that, to be put on a bottle, right?
Yeah, it's painstaking. It is kind of the definition of hand bottled, and hand finished, because it literally takes a person or multiple people putting those butterflies on. And you should also see somewhere at some point in time, I'll track it down and send you this picture. But I've got this kind of this reject, what we're calling our reject bottles, where the butterflies are askew,
Right.
right? And so then we've got to strip those things off and try to place them again. And we do our best. Sometimes there are bottles that slip through. If there's a good friend of mine in Georgia, if he's listening to this, he'll kind of laugh, because he seems to always find the bottle on the shelf that somehow either slipped through quality control, or like got jumbled and kind of shaken around in the truck on the way to the store with that's missing a butterfly or something. But it's always
Mm-hmm.
it's always like one person that happens to. But we're really, it takes a lot when you think about like time, the time it takes to bottle something. And bottling is, it's more complicated than it looks. And we have, when you look at our bottle, there are different components to it, that, we have high standards. We want the labels to be straight. We want the butterflies to exist.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and even when you think about like 3 to 5 days, maybe it depends on the size of the run, but that's probably about right. But then you got to go back to the fact that it takes over 6 months of lead time to get the butterflies made.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and we're kind of unfortunately living in this world where supply chain and supply constraints exist. Back in 2020, it was like nobody could find a bicycle or toilet paper. Today, people are stealing catalytic converters to get the, whatever it is out of the converter that they use to do something else, to resell. I don't know, but it's
Right.
like things are disappearing, and harder to get. And so it takes more advanced planning. It takes more upfront cost. It takes more time.
Mm-hmm.
And we're trying to work through those things as efficiently as possible, because we want to make sure that we deliver the best possible product at the best possible price. It's going back to this, and I've beaten a kind of a dead horse here, but it's all about the experience.
Absolutely. And the intentionality is the part that I think doesn't go unnoticed amongst a lot of us, and the fact that you're willing to take that on. I think about there's the I can't remember what the triangle is called, but there's like good, fast, and cheap, right? And you put all of them on a tip of a point of the triangle, and you can have two of those. Like, you
Yeah.
can find yourself anywhere between two of those, but you can't have all three. And so you're making something that is good, and you're making it as fast as you can. So it's not necessarily going to be cheap, and you don't want it to be cheap, I don't think. I mean, from what I get from this particular brand offering is that it is not coming in as a budget offering. It is something that is intentionally beautiful, intentionally delicious, and intentionally crafted. And
Right.
I think that speaks to some of the ethos of what the brand is.
I think you're right. And the it is all intentional. We're never going to be able to compete with that bottom shelf. We're never going to be a well bourbon. Um, it's just, we don't have 200 years of lineage. We don't
Mhm.
have the access to barrels that we can produce at you know, I don't know, $450 a barrel. Um, right? Our costs are um, obviously higher, but like you say, we want the quality to be top notch. That's why we work with Jim Rutledge. That's why we hired Shaylin Gammon. Um, we believe that you can that there's a way to produce high quality, unique bourbons and ryes, and that's our intention. And it doesn't have to look like it's survived a flood and a fire, and I don't have to make up a story that I found this mash bill, that my great grandfather who migrated west from Mingo County, West Virginia, um,
Hmm.
uh, you know, brought this with him. And in his belongings, when we were going through them 100 years later, we found this amazing mash bill and we've recreated it. And it's like, that's not true,
Right.
right? It's not true, and it's not us.
Right.
Right. So we like the idea that the bourbon drinking experience can be modernized. We obviously salute the heritage of the past, and I think we kind of embody that with a relationship with Jim. But um, there is an elevated experience that is available, and we're trying to provide that.
Yeah, and actually, you touched on it, so you already took one of my questions away from me. Is
Sorry.
it feels like no. This is a pro because this is the way the conversation goes. It feels like you have an interest in being a quality spirit, and I have this mindset, at least in my work, that if you hire the best, you'll be the best. And I had on here like, okay, you've hired and you work with Jim Rutledge and you've hired Shaylin, like what is that like working with folks like that for a relatively new brand?
It's uh, I like winning the Powerball or something. It's I, I I'm always in awe of Jim every time I get to talk to him. And first and foremost, because he is one of the kindest human beings I've ever met. Um, and he's always got time. He's always willing to explain, um, and work through what he's thinking. Um, he's very direct. Uh, Jim is just uh, you know in terms of like the Mount Rushmore of great human beings. Forget bourbon. Jim is on it. Jim
Mhm.
is Jim. It's just a joy to be able to know him, to call him a friend, and to call him a colleague. It's unbelievable. Um, and it doesn't get old either. It's still there's still this, like, oh my God, this is Jim Rutledge,
Right.
right? He just answered my phone call, stuff like that. Um, you know,
I get that feeling regularly whenever I reach out to any brand and they're like, "Yeah, we'll absolutely talk." So even whenever
yeah,
I reach out to you and you're like, "Yeah, we'll do this," like I understand the feeling because for anyone who's not in the industry, talking to someone in the industry is that level. For someone who is in this industry, talking to someone like Rutledge is that sort of next step. Like that's huge, and
yeah,
it feels like not only are you hiring people that are good at their job, you're just hiring generically good citizens, like just good human beings, and that's
yeah,
valuable.
yeah. I come from the political world. The last number of, I don't know how many numbers of years of my life have been spent doing mainly tech policy consulting. Um, and I've worked with some very good people, some people I'm still in touch with today who will be friends forever. But the one thing that I think working in politics generally taught me is that I want to work with people I like. And that was a new kind of one of the new opportunities here with Blue Run, is that we specifically formed our team and continue to form our team based upon not just one thing, which is, are they good at what they do? That's obviously, a significant hurdle that people have to reach. But are they good people? Are we going to get along?
Mm-hmm.
Is this going to be? Are we going to stand? Are we going to be able to communicate well? Do we like each other? Would we, if Blue Run didn't exist, would we still hang out together? Like that's what it should be, right? Because we're not. This isn't. This isn't brain surgery. This isn't rocket science.
Yep.
Right. We're not curing cancer. Unfortunately, I wish we were. Um, so this is a chance for us to do things differently, not only in terms of how we build our team, but what the bottle looks like, what goes in the bottle,
Yep.
how we talk about tasting notes, the types of folks that we podcast with, right? Like there are so many pieces to this Blue Run puzzle that allow us to do things differently, to think differently, and to create something that hasn't been done before. Because it's like, I don't want to it's like the definition of insanity in a way, right? If it's been done in the past, that's not necessarily the way we're going to do things in the future. And so, it's not like we're going to come out with a bourbon that's 49% corn,
Right.
but
You have some guardrails, but you don't necessarily have to do the same thing that's over and over. There's a story that I use regularly in my work environment. It's about a woman who's fixing a ham, and I guess it could be anybody fixing a ham, but they go and they pull out the ham and they cut the ends off the ham. They put it in the pan and they cook it. And one of the children says, why are you cutting the ends off the ham? And the person says, I don't know. That's what my mom did. And so she goes and asks her mom, and her mom's like, I don't know. That's what my mom did. So they go ask the grandmother, and they get down the line and they realize the first person started cutting the ends off the ham because the pan was only so big and it would just fit the ham. But because it became a tradition, when the pan got bigger, they just kept doing the same thing over and over again. And it is insanity. And so it's refreshing to hear this, is that, you can appreciate the lineage and the history and all of the pomp and circumstance that comes with it, but you don't necessarily have to follow it. And you're kind of giving a good case of why you do business the way you do business. And people are noticing. I have a handful of friends on social media that have received the handwritten notes whenever they get stuff. And like, that's a huge deal to people, because in today's modern business world, that doesn't regularly occur. But my question then becomes, all right, so how you do business is indicative of who you are, but how did you land on whiskey specifically, as opposed to anything else in the world you could have done? Why this?
Oh, it's a really good question. I've long felt more of an entrepreneurial pull in my life, and I think that's just generally based upon the fact that I had access to all these other businesses that were doing amazing things, or not so amazing things that needed to be fixed. And providing what I thought were good ideas and valuable insights. And occasionally my ideas would be utilized and put into play. And sometimes, they'd be mothballed. And what I was much more interested in as I get older and as I kind of enter this, whatever this next phase of my life is, I wasn't really content with that sort of setup. I think that I occasionally do have some good ideas. I think that a lot of these businesses have probably erred when they didn't use them. And it just became evident to me that I'd really like the chance to apply a lot of my thinking toward something that is my own. And so, okay, great. Now what, right?
Right. Right.
Um, and one of my frequent collaborators is Jesse McKnight. He's one of my co-founders now. Um, and Jesse's Jesse's always been one of the people in my life I could call, and vice versa. It's both. It goes both ways, but where I could call and say, "I've got a crazy idea," and he'd say, "Yeah, tell me, what is it?" Um, and so we did that quite frequently with kind of what I would call less than good ideas. And then one day he called me, and Jesse spends a lot of time in Kentucky. He's from Georgetown in Scott County originally.
Mhm.
He's a co-owner of a business in Eastern Kentucky. Um, and one day he called me and said, "Hey, somebody wants to sell me some barrels of bourbon." And I live in Los Angeles, and I when I was younger, I'd travel down to Los Angeles, and I'd see on the 405 freeway there would be a van driving by, and it would be selling like speakers out of the back on a freeway, right? And
Uh-huh.
that was what I pictured in my mind. It's like, okay, wait a minute, so you got a guy who's going to sell you a couple barrels of bourbon out of the
Mhm.
back of his truck or something like that, right? That it's not a business, right? But it's funny at the beginning you brought up Beam White Label, and yeah, that's what I drank too in college, and I had to drown it in enough Coke to make it palatable.
Right.
But that was my gateway bourbon, and it developed thereafter. Um, and you know, when Jesse said, "Hey, I've got this guy who wants to sell me some barrels of bourbon," obviously my reaction was like, "That's not a business," but it got me thinking,
Hmm.
right? It got me kind of more focused, and I would spend hours at liquor stores looking at bottles and kind of absorbing labels, um, and thinking through flavor profiles. And Jesse and I talked a lot about, like, okay, is it 2 barrels, or is it 2,000 barrels or 2 million barrels, or because the last thing that I really wanted to do was put a lot of time and effort into something that was going to be a flash in the pan. Um, maybe we'd be able to cobble together a handful of barrels and do a release, and then what? So we put a lot of time and a lot of effort into a real comprehensive business plan, and some long-term, long-range thinking. Um, and um, there was kind of this last kind of component of, okay, this is all well and fine. I think obviously we understand bourbon. Obviously we kind of understand, I think, the marketing side and what could be done better or differently. But, you know, in a vacuum, that's all well and fine, but you gotta actually pull it off. And so I think one of the kind of the biggest moves that we made was to call Devin McKinney, who is another one of our co-founders, and he's currently the head of lifestyle design at Nike,
Hmm.
and also a bourbon drinker. And he was just like ready and raring to go. Like, yeah, we can totally do this. Yes, we can do it differently. Yes, we
Hmm.
can kind of reimagine um, what bourbon can be, and it doesn't need to be named old or ancient in order to resonate with consumers. And oh, by the way, when we're doing our demographics research, not everybody looks like you and me who's drinking bourbon,
Right.
and that is such a beautiful thing, right? Um, and so there are people from a broad range of backgrounds and demographics
Hmm.
um, who are drinking bourbon, um, and they're not really being spoken to.
Not at all.
And right, like, I don't, you know, they're probably buying brands because those are the ones on the shelves that are available to them. But
Hmm.
is there really a true brand affinity? Um, and so, we're focused on that brand affinity. That's why, I mean, it's why I spend, so much time. I don't know if you can see this, John, but like, this is what I have to do today,
Yep.
right? I've got a bunch of letters to write. But the thing is, I want to know the people in Tennessee and Virginia and Florida and, Georgia and everywhere else that they're buying our bottles, because I'm just like them, right? There's no
Hmm.
difference between me and the woman in Louisiana, or, the guy in Delaware, um, who drinks and enjoys uh, um, drinking whiskey. I think that what we're really trying to accomplish is a personal connection. I want them to know me just as much as I want to know them, because I am them, and I would want to be affiliated with a brand that I had access to, that treated me as not just a customer or consumer, but a friend.
Yeah, and it's refreshing to hear it because I see that most of bourbon and whiskey marketing is targeted at people that look a lot like you and me, the average white North American male, and that's not what the market looks like, right? That's
Mm-mm.
what the marketing may look like, but that's not what the market necessarily looks like. Um, so this is there's a question, then there's a follow up question to it. So how did you land on the butterfly? Like how did the butterfly become the thing?
It was one of the iterations, and what Devin was playing around with was the idea that, um, there is a metamorphosis, um, that is available to be made in bourbon. So, and kind of taking a step back, you look at, the monarch butterfly in Kentucky is um, kind of important in its history and its geography. You're going to find those, and so, when we're really thinking about Kentucky, and we're going back to what Jesse and his brother John McKnight grew up with in Georgetown around Royal Spring, which is where Elijah Craig first made his bourbon, um, you know, and the idea that water from Royal Spring was the thing that made that, at least Elijah Craig credited for, making his bourbon taste good. Um, we really tried to kind of make this central to Jesse's childhood, which, he called Royal Spring the Blue Run. Um, I think likely, a connection to Blue Run Baptist Church, which was Elijah Craig's
Mhm.
church, which I guess was in Virginia at the time, but is no longer. Um, and so, there are frogs, there are butterflies, there are a bunch of things around the Blue Run, Royal Spring, that Jesse remembers. Um, but once we kind of focused on the fact that there's butterflies, and butterflies go through this metamorphosis, this progression, and that's what we wanted to do. When you think about kind of modernizing the approach to bourbon, um, it requires a change, right? And what kind of embodies change more than a butterfly, right?
Right.
It goes through these stages of its own existence, and so that's kind of the working theory there with the butterfly, is that it's about change.
I like that. I like this imagery of metamorphosis. But I think sort of an unintended connection that you can probably draw now that you wouldn't have known at that point in time is that so you have this chaos theory called the butterfly effect, right?
Mm-hmm.
So a small change in one ecosystem leads to a much broader change. A butterfly flaps its wing on the other side of the country. There's a tornado here. I would challenge, or I would say that the introduction to the way that you do business has that metamorphic change to the whiskey marketplace, but it has that sort of um, situation where now other people are scrambling to try to kind of keep up with this idea that you guys are doing as far as how you build it. And so I think it goes together well with it, at least in my mindset.
I think you're right. I think the butterfly effect is it's real,
Mm-hmm.
and it's apropos to what we're talking about. 100%. Imitation, I think, is the greatest form of flattery, and we're starting to see. If you just peruse Instagram, you're going to see other brands are starting to write notes to people. Um, Note writing is not a novel theory. It's not a next gen sort of approach at all. And I'm sure
No, I
people
mean
have been
it's an
doing it for
Emily
a long
Post. I
time.
mean, it's an
Yeah,
Emily Post book of etiquette, so it's been
yeah.
around for a while, but it's a forgotten thought
It
process.
really is. It really is. It is forgotten, and I don't actually know the last time I purchased a product where the CEO of the company has written me a handwritten note thanking me for trying their product.
Right.
Right? Like, what's wrong? Maybe what's wrong with me for thinking that we can pull this off as we continue to grow and scale and put more bottles out there. But um, I like to say um, that these notes don't scale, but it's the one part of the business that need to doesn't need to scale,
Hmm.
right? Um, it's it's kind of fun. It is fun seeing these notes pop up, occasionally, and who knows what the math is? Maybe it's like one photo for every 100 I send,
Hmm.
but I think they're meaningful, and I think that um, it is we are in the midst of bourbon 2.0. And when you look at tequila and vodka and gin, um, mainly, um, they've all been through, and I guess even rum to a certain extent, they've already been through this kind of second act. Um, and I don't think bourbon has. And I think
Hmm.
that we're on the leading edge of hopefully helping it find its second act, where maybe a bottle that's called Old Something with a picture of an old guy smoking a cigar is not necessarily going to be as is not going to resonate with people as much as perhaps our bottle might, or a
Hmm.
different bottle that's about to be released. Um, you
And
know,
I think you're right. I think, and this is why I like craft so much, is I think that we can draw a pretty close parallel to what is happening in bourbon to what happened in craft beer specifically, right? And so if you run back 25 years or 30 years, craft beer wasn't really a thing, but you started seeing people home brewing, and so we went from and it's on its second act, is what we'll say, because I spent some time in Cincinnati a couple of weeks ago, and one of the guys there was talking about all of these tunnels that are underneath the city that were a part of the beer industry in the 17 and 1800s in Cincinnati, and then it died off, and now Cincinnati is kind of resurging in its interest in craft beer, and craft whiskey is the same way. Whiskey in the United States was a craft industry at its inception, and then it mirrors the industrial revolution here in the United States, and it gets more mechanized and more cost effective and more whatever, and then people lose interest, and you couldn't hardly give it away, and then there's this bourbon boom, so to speak, and now there's craft distilleries popping up everywhere. They're doing unique things. There's brands that are coming up that are available, and uh, I like that your brand is not trying to hide that it is a brand and not a distillery. Like you're not necessarily um, setting up shop in a location. You may distill somewhere. You may go to Bardstown or somewhere else and say, "Hey, we want a custom distill," but you're not sticking up a still in a location and saying, "Yep, we're a distillery," but then buying everything somewhere else.
Right.
It's appreciative, at least for us, for me as a consumer. But your brand you've been in the market for almost 2 years. Is that a correct statement?
Yeah, we launched in October of 2020.
My assumption usually is that you're probably a couple of years into inception at that point in time, right? Like before you
Yeah.
ever even launched, you're a couple of years of work to get to that point. And so if we run the clock back 4 years at this point, how many people were looking to put out what would be considered a premium product with a high design value and a quality, let's just say source distillate? Like it's a lot like your handwritten notes, is that it's really audacious to believe that you can and are going to do these things. Um, and I asked this question last week of who I was talking to, and looking at what you know now, would you have, if you'd have known all of the facts that you know right now, but known it before you started, would you have actually taken that leap, or is there some degree of uncertainty that just let you kind of forge ahead?
Wow, that's such a deep question to ask. With the ability of foresight, I would probably, the only thing I would change is I would have done more. I would
Mhm.
have gone harder.
That's awesome.
Um,
So that's a straightforward answer. That's what, and the answer I got from Ari Sussman from Mammoth last week was that, yeah, we would have done it because we do hard things. That's what this is. Like that's what the intent behind it is. Um, and
yeah,
it's
yeah, and that's a good answer from Ari too, right? Like um, if it were easy, everyone would be doing it.
correct.
This is not easy. Um, you know, there's so many things along the way that can go wrong. There was a moment in time, John, where France was on the verge of its second lockdown. That's where we get our glass,
Hmm.
and we had to put a pallet of bottles on a plane, and it that plane took off. I think it was a day before the full French lockdown, um, and it cost us a ton of money. It
Hmm.
was the type of thing where it's just like, you know, you gotta do what you gotta do and just swallow hard and hope it all works out. And anything can go wrong. We had some bottles that were misprinted also, and that's one of the challenges that we have as a company that screen prints its glass. Paper is easier,
Hmm.
right? Because mistakes can happen, but there was a printing issue, um, and we lost a few thousand bottles of empty glass,
Hmm.
that had to be replaced almost instantaneously. So definitely things can happen. It's super hard. It's definitely not as easy as saying like, I'm going to go buy a barrel and then we're just going to bottle it.
Right.
You got to mix in TTB. You got to mix in bottling schedules, right? Because of this bourbon boom, we don't have a bottling line, so we're reliant upon somebody else's or other companies' lines, and it's not, you can't just say, oh, hey, my glass didn't show up. Can we just push to next week? Pushing to next week might mean we have to push to next quarter, you know?
Hmm.
Um, and, when there are, pledges that have been made to your distributors about when product's going to arrive, it's really got to be clockwork. Um, and so, anyway, Ari is right, but I think with the kind of the ability to know what I know now, um, we would have purchased more of those barrels that we initially launched with, the 13-year,
Hmm.
um, because they're magnificent, um, and we probably would have started contract distilling earlier. if possible. That's time is something
Right.
you can't rush, right? You can play guitars and loud music around it, or you can put a barrel in the back of a truck or on a boat,
Yep.
and people do those things.
Hmm.
You can run electricity currents through barrels, but we don't believe in any of that. We just believe that time is something that is going to pass, as it wishes.
Yeah, and I enjoy the so I know most of the products. I didn't know about the electricity one. That's the one that I'm not sure of. But the rest of them, I sort of understand that, and I know that a lot of consumers look at that as like, oh, they're just trying to speed up aging. But to me, I view it as they're just trying to age differently.
Mm-hmm.
It's the same as if I wanted to say I'm going to age whiskey in Texas versus in Alaska. You're just changing some of the variables to see what happens. Obviously, it's not going to you're not going to get the exact same behavior, which we somewhat understand what's going to happen over 5, 7, 10 years if you age whiskey in Kentucky. Like we've got a
Yeah.
fairly good understanding of that. You have your outliers.
Couple centuries of history with that, right?
Right. Yeah. We've got a little bit of source data to kind of go back to of how to get there. Something that I've noticed, and I don't, maybe you have, maybe you haven't, maybe I'm off base here, is that I'm seeing a number of people that end up uh, kicking off a brand, jumping into the whiskey bourbon industry from tech. And so you said you were doing tech policy consulting, but you have folks like Barrel who comes from a tech background. If I remember correctly, Bardstown Bourbon Company came. Some of their like what is do you know of anything that is specifically attractive about bourbon to tech people that they just tech and healthcare? We all
Hmm.
like second acts largely are coming from those industries.
Well, gosh, I don't know of anything in particular. Um, I think that some of those some of those industries are kind of a grind,
Mhm.
right? It's I mean, being in healthcare right now is a tough place to
Healthcare
be.
and education, right?
Healthcare and education. Maybe there's going to be a boom of teachers launching new bourbon brands. Um, I think that bourbon is a romance language, um, and maybe writing code is a romance language, and those maybe there are really kind of direct parallels. Direct parallels that exist. I'm not sure. It's a really interesting question. I know what I like. I know what I like to drink, um, and I think anybody who either is from Kentucky or lives in Kentucky um, feels why it's special, understands why it would be really meaningful and exciting, and to be part of this industry.
Yeah, it's part of me thinks so. I work in the tech industry a little bit. Part of me feels like that it is going from something that is zeros and ones, right? You're talking about code, you're talking about all these things, to something that has a degree of math, but also a degree of artistry. Being able to kind of craft a thing, whether it be a blend or a distillate or whatever. Like there's this convergence of science and art at the same place that can be particularly attractive to that type of person. Um, so earlier on, you made the statement that um, you guys don't have to rely on maybe a tornado or a fire tattered whiskey, but that's not necessarily true. And so I want to commend you for this. Is that I live 11 miles from Mayfield, Kentucky.
Oh,
Right, my wife teaches in that school system, and so for anyone who watches this that isn't aware, there was a tornado back in December, and there's a particular bar there that had a restaurant, whatever you want to call it, that had a series of bottles that survived a direct hit from what is the largest tornado that the state has ever seen. And your brand specifically was one of the bottles that survived that. And so you pledged an opportunity. They were auctioning these things off to match dollar for dollar up to $10,000 for a single bottle. And so you technically do have your Tornado whiskey
We
that could
do.
be worth up to $20,000. If somebody bids
Yeah.
10, you kick in 10, it's a $20,000 whiskey. So you might be able to get like a little notch up on the H. Taylors of the world, because not only is it a limited single bottle offering, it's got a high value. But I knew that was a
I'm glad
thing.
you noticed that. That was first of all, we were lucky to be asked to participate um, in the fundraising efforts to support the community. It was um, the amount of devastation, and hopefully you avoided that devastation.
Yep.
Good. Um, was in some instances it kind of looked like what's happening in Ukraine right now, right? With just completely flattened. It was the restaurant where those bottles survived. It was and I'm sure you saw those pictures of the bottles. Um, Miraculous,
Yeah.
absolutely miraculous. And so I guess we do have those.
Yeah. And you have to be commended for that too, is because someone could call and say, "Hey, do you want to participate in this?" And no one would ever know if you said no to that. Like, you
Yeah,
have the opportunity to decline, and no one would know, and you could kind of move on down the line, but you agreed to it, and that's there's a high degree of kudos that goes into that, because it has a direct impact. It was ground zero. It doesn't look like that anymore because everything has been cleaned up and now it's just all flat land, which is differently depressing for that particular
yeah,
community. Before it was rubble, now it's just flat land with nothing there, with the idea of rebuilding. But every dollar kind of helps move that forward. And most of my wife's students, they were all directly impacted by that. And so any dollar that kind of comes in was greatly appreciated by that community. And I just, like I said, you said that, and it was on my list of things that I wanted to bring up. Not so much ask a question, but just kind of you know, it matches. If I draw any kind of a conclusion of the character of the brand from this particular conversation, it's not surprising. This is exactly what you guys you're putting your money where your mouth is. You're being who you actually are. It's not a story. It's not a gimmick. It's not whatever. It is intrinsically valuable, to the bourbon industry, to the whiskey industry, just to industry in general. I mean, you're a modernized bourbon company and expressions with richness and a whole host of other things, but you're also real, right?
thanks for saying that, John. I appreciate it. And we love being part of this community. Um, we love the community, right?
Mhm.
I think the thing that really resonates with me now, being in this industry versus just kind of being a bourbon consumer, um, is that this this community of people is warm and welcoming. Um, you know, we're all different. We all come from different places. All have different backgrounds. We tend to maybe even believe different things politically. We like different teams,
Mhm.
right? But there's this one thing that draws us all together, that I think helps us overcome all those differences. Um, right? It's a really special community. The friendships that I'm sure that you've created and that I've created are um, they'll withstand the test of time. And the beauty at which people can make fast friends, fast friendships here too, that are as strong. These bonds are super strong. So I love it. I love being part of it. Hopefully nothing like that happens again.
Mhm.
Um, but if it does, we're going to be a part of supporting the rebuild.
Yeah. Like I said, it just kind of it's a testament to who you guys are as a brand. So earlier in the conversation, you made a statement. You may have coined a phrase. I don't know if you've heard it from other people before, but you said bourbon 2.0. I've worked in the tech industry long enough to remember Web 2.0, and whenever it was like a real term, and then it became a gimmick after the fact. But so Bourbon 2.0, what does Bourbon 2.0 look like to you?
I think it looks like Blue Run. Um, you know, it's we talked about this a little bit earlier. These other industries that have gone through their own metamorphoses. I look back at vodka in the kind of the early '90s, and I remember when Sky Vodka was just really popped on the shelf, right? That
Mm-hmm.
blue bottle, it looked amazing, and um, you know, uh, that was one of the things that I would order. God, I can't believe I really did that, but I did.
Same.
Um,
I'm with you. I'm at the same
right.
place.
So you've been there. So it sounds like we've been through the same kind of drink journey. Uh, you know,
Probably.
um, yeah, but I don't think it. I think only some of this is aesthetics. Um, I think the majority of what Bourbon 2.0 looks like is that realization that we talked about earlier, that there is this diversifying um, base of brown spirits drinkers.
Mhm.
It's not just, like we talked about, people like us. You know, there are people who um, I guess um, like not I guess there are people who like bourbon, who drink bourbon, um, who don't have that brand affinity that we talked about, um, who don't feel a part of something. Um, and so Sky Vodka is great, right? Back in the '90s, that was great. It stood out. That was a 2.0 moment for vodka. Um, I don't think you can just change the way a bottle looks and expect it to be 2.0 though
Mhm.
in this kind of in these modern times with um, educated consumers. There has to be something more, and I think that something more is the personal approach that we offer. I think it is tying together the old and the new, the Jim Rutledge with the Shaylin Gammon. Um, I think it's being able to communicate um, kind of the heritage of what we're doing with a vision for the future. Um, and that vision for the future is that you know um, this is a spirit that, like I talked about earlier, I called it a romance language, right?
Mhm.
And it's because I think it is. I think it's something that just it resonates with people. Um, and I don't know about you, but I don't have just the same bottle. I don't go to the store and buy 100 bottles of the same thing.
Right.
I want to try different things. I want to have unique flavor experiences. I want to have a unique look and feel. Sometimes I want to drink bourbon with that requires a steak knife, and
Right.
um, you know, sometimes I want bourbon that requires a spoon, you know, or a straw is probably the better
Right.
kind of
No,
the,
yeah.
the the better utensil there,
I own no. Well, I
right?
take that back. I may have like two or three duplicates across the bottles that I own, but what's the reason for having 10 of the same bottle? There really
Right,
isn't one. It's there's so many things.
right.
This is the thing that you probably get this. Someone like, what's your favorite whiskey that's not your brand, right? And I have a hard time answering that because I usually say I don't know because I haven't tried them all yet, but I'm
Yeah,
trying to
that's
try them all.
a that's that's a pretty darn good answer. Um, that's a pretty darn good answer. There are a lot of bourbons out there that I like. Um, I obviously prefer Blue Run,
Hmm.
um, and But John, one of these days I'm going to come over and we'll drink something that may be Blue Run or may not be, and I'm sure we'll enjoy it because we get to like be in each other's company.
Right.
Um,
That's as much
so
of
you mentioned
that's
this earlier.
go ahead.
You mentioned this earlier. That you tie different flavors or experiences to your past, and so sometimes drinking bourbon with a friend, um, can invoke so many good thoughts and good feelings.
Hmm.
And it might be going back to those days of White Label Beam in college. Um, and it might be, drinking having a pour with me of Blue Run 14 year. Um, I think a lot of bourbon drinking can be situational based.
Without a doubt.
Where are you? What's the weather? What do you feel like? What's your mood? Um, so I'm not, well, I was going to say I'm not picky. I'm picky.
Hmm.
Um, I'm picky. I know what I like. Um, and, but I'm always open to unique new opportunities.
Yep. And that's where
What do you like?
uh you know, I'm diving more and more into craft as much as I can, and I hate that term because it's almost become a dirty word, like, oh, you're craft whiskey,
Yeah.
because that is where to me that is where experimentation is happening. Unique cask finishes, American single malts, whatever, right? Like they have an opportunity. It's very hard for a Jim Beam to experiment because they are at scale. They're at a significant scale, and to be able to stop all the distillation and barreling to do one project is incredibly difficult. Now they're all working their way through how to solve that. Jim Beam has their craft distillery that they're putting in at their Claremont location,
Mhm.
but that's where it is, and so I try to pick up more and more craft flavors. I love what Alan Bishop is doing at French Lick Spirits. I enjoy what Peerless is doing in Louisville. They're I think the two it's probably maybe the best way to say this, the two best things that I had in 2021 were the I had to look at it again, Peerless Double Oaked and Bardstown Bourbon Company's Ferrand. And so one is someone else's distillate that's aged in a unique cask, and the other is a small distillery who is doing their own thing, aging it. They did their double casking, the double oaked or whatever. Now I hadn't had Blue Run until this year, so that doesn't count. You guys aren't in that mix. I've got my opportunity to have that now, but that's where I live. That's where I'm trying to live now. Is get away from trying to find the E.H. Taylor tornado warehouses of the world and find more of the Catoctin Creeks or the Blue Runs for that matter, the Three Chords, the Mammoths. That's where it is for me. Like someone is crafting with intentionality and not trying to rely on a long-term story that has been around forever.
Yeah, I love to hear that. I'm glad.
So you mentioned we've talked about it a number of times that we represent probably the bulk of what is happening in marketing within whiskey right now as far as our demographic, but there's a host of other people that are whiskey consumers that are might be called underserved. um, what's what do you think is the most interesting underserved market that bourbon could be attacking right now, that Blue Run could be attacking?
All of them.
All of them.
All of them.
That's fair.
I think that uh, I think women and African Americans um, are, if you look at just people of color,
Mhm.
um, you know, I think that those are two areas. We're big fans of bourbon women. We're big fans of the Black Bourbon Society. Um, you know, those are groups that are big and growing and doing it right, and focused on education, um, uh, and you know you could just kind of, you know it's hard to say, this or that, right? Like,
Mhm.
we're focused on communicating with a larger audience than currently exists out there.
Mhm.
I think for a number of different brands, uh, and you know when I say communicating with, it's not just I'm sending people letters and that's the last time we talk to them.
Mhm.
Um, we I kind of I picture it as more of collaborative communication. Um, you know, I get a hold of somebody or vice versa. They've got a comment, they've got a note, they've got something they're thinking about or they want to see. It just doesn't fall on deaf ears. This is
Mhm.
this is really a kind of a journey that we're all on together. Um, and so it's kind of important to realize that consumers don't have to be nameless and faceless. And they shouldn't be, right? We don't have a company without consumers.
Mhm.
And nobody really does. But it's very different than selling a box of cereal or something like that. um, uh, right, you know um, this is very kind of, I mean, I guess buying a box of cereal is also a personal experience
No,
and
I
whatnot, but
I
I
get
don't
what
think.
you're after. Is that like the faceless consumer is really only a market segment for commodity whiskey for big decision
Yeah,
making, not
there
for
it's a creation.
right.
Yeah, it's a creation. It's not the nameless faceless consumer exists only because the brands allow them to exist as nameless and faceless.
Mhm. Yeah, we spend a
Come
lot of
come
time
up.
on
I'm
the
welcoming everybody who wants to be a part of Blue Run. Come be a part of Blue Run.
yeah.
We're a big family. Why big tent?
When we try to craft a solution in my particular line of work, we try to develop as many personas as we can, and that's trying to identify different people that might interact with whatever we're doing, and how do we make sure that the experience fits their need specifically. And I appreciate the discussion around people of color and around women specifically. Maybe 2 months ago, I had Morgan from Female Whiskey Society on. Did 2.5 hours where we just had a fun conversation. But I'm glad, and I'm glad that those societies exist. I'm sad that they have to, right? Because we've
Yeah,
historically we've created a kind of a boys only club, and um, those societies don't bubble up because we were already being inclusive. They bubble up because we were being exclusive.
right.
But it's
Right. And that's a female whiskey society, and I should have worn my sweatshirt. I just bought a sweatshirt from Morgan
mhm,
the other day. Um and you're right, they shouldn't have to exist. I'm certainly glad that they do.
mhm,
Um uh but Blue Run was founded under the premise that it's bourbon for everyone, right? And that doesn't mean that you know it's bourbon for some people. It's bourbon for everybody.
yep.
Um, and this community is for everyone. So anybody who wants to be a part of it, no matter where they come from, what they look like, or what they believe, there's a home for you here.
Yeah, and I'm gonna say I can't imagine a better way to end this than on a note like that for what we're talking about. So, um, I appreciate the time that you've given me and had the opportunity to have this discussion. It doesn't go unnoticed by the whiskey community. Your participation in a lot of different things. Is there anything else that you'd like to say before we kill the recording of this?
Well, thank you, John, and thanks for having me on, and giving me the opportunity to share with your fans a little bit more about Blue Run. Um, we mean it when we say we want to talk to you. come find us. We're on Instagram and Facebook and Twitter, and maybe one day we'll post something on TikTok. We'll see, but it's all at Blue Run Spirits. And if you want to interact with me, drop me an email. I'm at mike@bluerunspirits.com. I am 99% sure that I'll make sure I get back to you. If you don't hear from me pretty much instantaneously, drop me another line. And I want to hear from you. I want more people to feel that they've got a home in the bourbon community with Blue Run Spirits.
It resonates with everything else that you said here today. Like I said, I appreciate the time. Sitting down with people like Mike from Blue Run Spirits is really a fantastic opportunity for me. It's a chance to be able to talk to people who are passionate about what they do. They are what we might consider to be good citizens of the whiskey community, and they do nothing but help lift the entire segment. If you don't come away from this with an understanding of anything other than you need to buy whatever they have available on the shelf that you come across, or follow them on social media, or become aware of what it is that they're doing, I don't know what to tell you. This is exactly the kind of brand that more people need to template themselves off of. But thanks for tuning in for this episode of the Embellish Podcast. If you enjoyed this, please leave me a review on whatever platform you are consuming this on, and leave a comment if possible. Hit me up on social media at Twitter or Instagram using EmbellishPod, and you can follow along with whatever's going on here. I can also be found at www.embellishpod.com, and has all of my links, accounts, and contact details. I'll be back again next week with another new offering. So until then, cheers and thanks for hanging out.